So our customers, currently Gradient's first market entry was in the US oil and gas industry. Even though the technologies are applicable to a wide variety of industries and a very wide variety of waters, we entered the oil and gas industry because at the time we were founded, remember this is 2012, and the shale boom was going up, and water was the centerpiece discussion, both economically and environmentally. So it was not just an environmental issue or not just a cost issue, it was both. And that's where we found the most interested customers, the right immediate application. So currently our commercial activities are in the oil and gas space, and our customers are exploration and production companies. So, all the oil companies that you heard about. As we move into other industries, our customers are also, the base is expanding to include power plants, for example, specifically coal power plants, textile mills, tanneries, so leather tannery factories and so on. As well as eventually, as we enter into more high recovery seawater desalination, we foresee ourselves going into more of the seawater desalination, large water companies and so on, but that's a little bit down the line. Yeah, so most of our commercial operations are in Texas and New Mexico. We just started up a plant in Pennsylvania, so not too far from here. And that's where all our field operations are located. But our R&D and engineering continues to be out of Boston. These are actually in the middle of oil and gas drilling acreage. So we're right in the active territory. And the plants actually are mobile, so they can move and be demobilized and mobilized as the customer's need change and the location changes. And this also depends on the application itself. For example, for the US oil and gas industry, where the plants tend to be somewhat smaller capacity, but they tend to move around a lot, there's a smaller but mobile plant. Whereas as we are talking to our overseas customers, both in oil and gas as well as in power plants, they tend to be much more concentrated and the activity stays there for several decades. For example, a power plant. If you install something at a power plant, it's going to be there. And so in those cases, we are designing and building systems that are much more stationary. Because again, same argument, if you don't have to make it mobile, then why pay for it? So currently, as we speak, we do not have any running commercial operations overseas, but we are working with large companies overseas, specifically focused in China and the Middle East. The other markets that we have in that down the priority list are India and Latin America, but there's a huge need for what we do, of course in the US where we are operating, but outside of the US, China and Middle East tend to be where our greatest queries are coming from these days. And for China, for example, we are developing a very large oil and gas project in Western China, which is actually a desert environment, so water is not readily available, but there is produced water coming from the oil wells. So if you can desalinate it, make it into fresh water at a cost that is viable, then you've just created a new source of fresh water in a fairly remote desert. So we are working on that. We are also working with coal power plants. So in China, recent regulations require all coal power plants to take their FGD wastewater, so this is flue gas desulfurization process, the wastewater generated from that process needs to be treated to a zero liquid discharge standard. And that's where we come in, because when you go to zero liquid discharge, you're getting higher and higher salinities until eventually you take all the water out and you're left with solid salts. So we are working on those FGD wastewater zero liquid discharge projects as well. One of our strategic investors and partners in China is Shanghai Electric, which is a very well reputed, publicly listed state-owned enterprise, which has operations both in China as well as overseas. They are mainly a power equipment manufacturer, but they also have a sizable desalination business. And we are working through them on a non-exclusive basis to develop these projects in China. In Middle East, it's so far mostly oil and gas or high recovery seawater desalination projects. So in terms of oil and gas, it's again taking water from the oil wells, making it into freshwater quality. In terms of seawater desalination, what currently happens is you take water from the ocean, you take half of it out as freshwater, the other half is highly concentrated with salt, and you dump it back into the ocean. What that sometimes tends to create is these localized zones of high salt content, which is not good for the marine life and the local ecosystem. So what some of our customers have come to us and asked if we can take that reject that's going back into the ocean, which is higher salinity, cannot be treated with existing seawater desalination technologies, and pull more water out of it. So we are developing such projects as well, where we'll take that reject, pull more water out of it, saturate the brine to almost the level where it starts to crystallize into salt, and then you've suddenly increased the capacity of the seawater desalination plant without taking any more water from the ocean. And the brine, since it's so highly saturated and a smaller volume, you could actually potentially use it to make sea salt, to make for chemical manufacturing. Textiles and tanneries also use saturated brines. So the idea would be to increase the capacity of desalination plants without taking any more water from the ocean and reducing or eliminating the brine discharge into the sea.